In 1970, Britain built a car with no real rivals. 4 seats, a folding roof, a V8 growl, Italian lines, and half the price of the Mercedes it was designed to embarrass, the Triumph Stag. For a moment, it had the whole road to itself. 3 years later, America threw it out, and it now sits on lists of the worst cars ever built. Same beautiful car. So what went wrong? One decision, made in a meeting, by clever men, for reasons that sounded perfectly sensible. They had a proven engine sitting on the shelf, ready to use. They looked at it and said, "No, we'll build our own, and we'll build it better." They were wrong, and that single act of pride didn't just kill the Stag, it put the first crack in a 100-year-old company that, within a decade, would die with its name stamped on a Japanese saloon. To understand how far Triumph fell, you have to understand how high it stood. Because in the years before the Stag, this was not a company anyone laughed at. Triumph had started, oddly enough, with a German. A man named Siegfried Bettmann, born in Nuremberg, came to London in the 1880s and built a business that would become one of the most British names on the road. Bicycles first, then motorcycles, then from 1923, cars. And by the 1950s and 60s, the Triumph badge meant something specific to a British buyer. It meant style you couldn't quite afford but desperately wanted. Think of what they were building: the TR sports cars, roadsters that Americans bought by the shipload, the little Spitfire, drawn by the Italian master Giovanni Michelotti, that let an ordinary man feel like something out of a film for the price of a family saloon. And later, the Dolomite Sprint, a compact saloon so advanced it carried a 16-valve engine years before the rest of the world caught up. This was an aspirational brand, a clever one, a company whose engineers believed, with real justification, that they were among the best in Britain. Triumph's star was rising, and everyone inside the building could feel it. That belief in their own brilliance was the company's greatest strength. It was about to become the thing that killed it. The idea for the Stag was born almost by accident, and it was beautiful from the very first sketch. In the mid-60s, Michelotti, the same designer behind the Spitfire, asked Triumph's engineering director, Harry Webster, for a car to play with, a donor to reshape into a show project of his own. Webster handed over an old 2000 saloon on one condition: if the result was any good, Triumph got first refusal. What came back from Turin stopped the Triumph directors in their tracks. A low, elegant, 4-seat convertible with a presence far beyond the humble saloon underneath it. Webster loved it instantly, and Triumph saw, in that shape, a chance to build something they never had before: a genuine Grand Tourer, not a little sports car for weekend fun, but a proper, sophisticated cruiser to sit alongside the most desirable cars in Europe. The target was audacious. They aimed the Stag squarely at the Mercedes-Benz SL, the German drop-top that sat at the top of the market and cost a small fortune. The same idea: open-top glamour, room for the family, effortless power, but at roughly half the price. There was one distinctive touch: a T-shaped roll hoop over the cabin, added for strength, and the tougher American safety rules everyone expected were coming. Some thought it spoiled the lines. Most forgave it the moment they saw the whole car. When the Stag was unveiled in June 1970, it was, on paper, unbeatable, gorgeous, spacious, half the price of its only real rival. Triumph had the field entirely to themselves. All they had to do was put the right engine in it. And that is precisely where it all went wrong. A Grand Tourer needs a grand engine. Triumph knew it. Their 4 cylinders were far too small for a car with these ambitions, and even their smooth 2.5-litre straight-six couldn't deliver the effortless muscle a Mercedes rival demanded. The Stag needed a V8. Here is the part that should make you wince, because Triumph had a V8 within arm's reach. By the time the Stag was in development, Triumph was owned by the same corporation that owned Rover, and Rover had a superb V8, a light, tough, aluminium unit originally designed by Buick in America, which Rover had bought and would go on to use for decades. It was proven. It was available. It was, by almost any measure, exactly the engine the Stag needed. Triumph looked at it, and Triumph said no. Now, the easy story is pure arrogance. That Triumph's engineers were too proud to use another division's engine and insisted, against all sense, on building their own. There is real truth in that. The claim went round that the Rover V8 wouldn't fit the Stag. An exaggeration at best, since it could be made to fit. Pride was part of it. But the honest story is more human than that. Triumph had just sunk a fortune, around £1.5 million, into a new production line for their own modern engine family. That money was already spent, and buying Rover's engine meant writing all of it off. And there was a real problem beyond pride. Rover could barely build enough of its V8 for its own cars. It simply couldn't supply the 12,000 engines a year the Stag would need, not without more costly investment and delay. So the decision wasn't madness. From inside that meeting, it looked defensible. Use the engine we've already paid to build, keep control in our own hands, and trust our own engineers to deliver. They designed a brand new 3-liter V8, derived from their own 4-cylinder architecture. On paper, it was advanced, and it was theirs. They were about to learn that advanced and finished are not the same word. The engine was rushed, and a rushed engine, in a car meant to carry a company's reputation, is a slow-motion disaster waiting for its moment. The trouble began with heat. The Stag's V8 ran hot, and its cooling system was never quite strong enough to cope. The water pump sat high in the valley of the engine, so even a small loss of coolant crippled its ability to circulate. Lose a little water, and the temperature climbed fast. Then it got worse, because the problems weren't only in the design, they were in the building. Engines left the factory with casting sand still trapped in their waterways, silting up the cooling passages from the first mile, and the purchasing department, hunting for savings, swapped in a cheaper hose than the one the engine was designed around, a penny-pinching substitution that choked the water flow and made the overheating worse. And when a Stag overheated, the damage was brutal. The engine used aluminium heads on an iron block, two metals that expand at different rates when hot. Push the temperature too far, and the heads warped, the gaskets failed, and the coolant poured away, which made it overheat again. A loop of destruction feeding itself. There was more. The main bearings were undersized and wore out early. The long timing chain stretched and, if it snapped, wrecked the valves and pistons in an instant. And the studs holding the heads down were set at angles that made them seize into the aluminium, so that a job which should have been simple became an engine-out nightmare. The most beautiful British Grand Tourer of its day had at its heart an engine that could destroy itself on a hot day in a traffic jam. And in America, where they'd hoped to sell most of them, that is exactly what it did. Now here is a cruel twist that most people never think about. The way the Stag's rarity made everything worse. You might assume a car with engine trouble gets fixed as owners, and mechanics learn its weaknesses. That's usually how it works. A common car breaks in common ways, and every garage soon knows the cure. The Stag never got that chance, because it never sold in the numbers to make it familiar. Triumph had thousands of dealers across Britain, but only around 19,000 Stags were sold in the UK across 7 years. Do the arithmetic and it's devastating. The average dealer sold 7 or 8 Stags in the car's entire lifetime, roughly one a year. Think what that meant for the man in the workshop. He might see a Stag limp in with a boiled engine once every 12 months. Never enough to learn the pattern, to recognize the warning signs, to develop the fixes owners would only work out decades later. Every failure was a fresh mystery. Every repair was a guess. So the car earned a reputation for unreliability faster than anyone could earn a reputation for curing it. The very rarity that should have made it special instead trapped it. Too rare to fix, too broken to trust. And word travels fast when a beautiful car keeps letting people down. By the time Triumph understood how badly the damage was spreading, the market had already made up its mind. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Triumph had projected around 12,000 Stags a year. The best they ever managed was about 5,500 in 1973, and from that peak it fell away. 3,500 the next year, under 3,000 the year after. By the end, Barely 1,000 a year trickled out of the factory. But the real humiliation came in America. The Stag had been designed with the United States in mind. That was meant to be its biggest market. The way American buyers had made the little TR sports cars a success. Instead, in 1973, after selling fewer than 3,000 cars there in total, Triumph pulled the Stag out of the United States entirely. The car built for America had been driven out of America in 3 years, defeated not by a rival, but by its own engine. Time magazine would later place the Stag on its list of the 50 worst cars ever made. And British Leyland, the vast, troubled corporation Triumph now belonged to, never properly fixed the engine. There were small patches, minor tweaks, but no serious re-engineering of the fundamental flaws. The company that had gambled everything on building its own V8 wouldn't spend the money to make that V8 work. Production limped on until 1977, and then the Stag was quietly killed. Just under 26,000 had been built in total. It was never directly replaced. The Mercedes killer that had owned the road in 1970 was gone in 7 years, taking a large piece of Triumph's good name with it. And now, the irony that turns this from a sad story into a genuinely painful one. The engine Triumph fought so hard to build, the one they rejected the Rover V8 for, the one they sank £1.5 million and all their pride into, was used in exactly one car, the Stag. When the Stag died, the Triumph V8 died with it. It never powered another model. All that investment, all that insistence, all that talent, spent on a single doomed machine. Meanwhile, the engine they turned down went on to conquer Britain. The Rover V8, the proven, available, aluminium unit Triumph had waved away, powered Rovers, Range Rovers, Land Rovers, MGs, and countless small sports cars and specials for the next 30 years. It became one of the most beloved and enduring engines in British motoring history. Triumph had stood at a fork in the road with a winning engine in one hand and an unfinished gamble in the other, and they had chosen the gamble. That is the whole tragedy in a single decision. Not bad luck, not a rival who beat them, a company so confident in its own brilliance that it bet against the sure thing, and lost. The same pride that let Triumph build something as bold and beautiful as the Stag was the exact pride that put the wrong engine inside it. Their greatest strength and their fatal weakness were the same trait, and you cannot separate them. The Stag alone didn't kill Triumph, but it landed at the worst possible moment, and the company around it was in no state to absorb the blow. By the 1970s, Triumph was trapped inside British Leyland, a sprawling, chaotic conglomerate that had thrown a dozen proud rival British carmakers under one leaking roof. Strikes were constant. Money for new cars was scarce. Brands that had once competed now fought each other for scraps of investment. In that environment, a company that had just wounded its own reputation had no room and no cash to recover. Triumph's one all-new car of the era that followed, the TR7, was built across 3 factories that each closed in turn, and was mocked and troubled from the start. The proud firm that had aimed at Mercedes was being hollowed out, and the ending, when it came, was almost unbearably undignified. Triumph's very last car, in 1981, wasn't a Triumph at all. It was a Honda, a Japanese saloon called the Ballade, rebadged and built in England as the Triumph Acclaim, because British Leyland had nothing of its own left to sell. The company that had once drawn crowds with Italian-styled Grand Tourers ended its life stamping its name on someone else's design. In the summer of 1984, that name disappeared for good. Drive through Coventry today, and the factories are gone. The Canley Works where Triumphs were built is offices and warehouses now. The proud badge lives on, only at classic car shows, on machines lovingly kept alive by people who never forgot what the name once meant. And here is the detail that says everything. Of the Triumph Stags still on the road today, more than 9 in 10 still run their original Triumph V8, the engine the world called a disaster. Their owners have spent decades quietly solving the very faults British Leyland never bothered to fix. The corrected cooling, the right parts, The care the factory refused to give them. In private garages, one enthusiast at a time, people finished the job Triumph started and abandoned. That is the quiet lesson underneath all of this. The engineering talent was real. The ambition was real. The beauty was real. What failed wasn't the dream. It was the decision to chase it without the humility to do it properly, and the willingness, when it went wrong, to look away rather than put it right. Triumph didn't die because Britain couldn't build a great car. Triumph died because, at the one moment that mattered most, a brilliant company was too proud to use a better idea than its own. The Stag was the most beautiful thing they ever made, and it was the mistake they never recovered from.